Okay, good evening. My name's Sean. I've been in aviation for 35 or so years. I've flown most things that fly, which don't have many engines. I've been teaching since 1988. And today we're going to continue from our last session and we're going to talk a little bit more about airband radio. Before we get too far into this, we're going to go through those handouts with the phonetic alphabet and the standard phrases. Well, I've got a couple here of those. You haven't got one, sir. And you haven't got one. And you haven't got one either. Right. Should have taken these home.
I studied them hard last night.
Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to go around the class, and I'll just ask you to spell your name for me using that phonetic alphabet. Okay? So, where are we going to start? We'll start here.
Lima, Oscar, Charlie, Hotel, Lima, Alpha, November.
There you
That's
go.
me first.
What's your surname?
Oscar, Sierra, Hotel, Echo, Alpha.
Sweet.
Okay.
Well done.
So if you have a radio problem and people can't hear you properly, often on the telephone people think my name is John. My name's Sean, obviously, but people often call me John. So if you can't get something across on the telephone or the radio in this case, spell it out using that phonetic alphabet and they will hopefully understand you. Okay, Gary.
Golf Alpha Romeo Yankee.
He's a Yankee. What's your surname?
Oh, far out.
Is that a strange surname, sir?
Righto. I've got to find the letters here.
Now you're supposed to have studied this.
Sierra. Yes. Oh yeah, Sierra Papa Alpha. Hang on, I'm going to spell my name. Oh, Romeo. Hang on. Sierra Papa Romeo Alpha.
If you can't remember how to spell your name, by the way, it might be worth just writing your name down so that you can remember how to spell it before you do this.
India.
Alright.
Yeah, Tango, India, Sierra.
That sounds about right, Gary.
Yeah, that's it.
Gary's pronounced.
I wouldn't know what this after all.
I was trying to remember how to spell it.
How do you say it?
Roll.
Romeo, Oscar, Bravo.
And your surname? Fernandez.
Bravo, Echo, Romeo.
And
And
November?
November.
Oh,
Delta.
Delta, Echo, Sierra.
Sweet.
Need to work.
You think you need to remember on the radio? You're going to have to remember these letters. You're going to have to be able to just bring them up straight away. So you need to study that information. You're not going to have this while you're flying around having an emergency going, where's that phonetic alphabet? You need to know this information. You need to memorize that phonetic alphabet so that you can use it when you need it. Next.
Bravo, Romeo, Alpha, Delta, Whiskey, India, Tango, Echo, Romeo, Foxtrot, India, Echo, Delta.
Well, at least somebody can remember that phonetic alphabet.
And the name.
Zero. And their name, yeah, that's a good one. Remembering your name's a good start.
Charlie, Yankee, Romeo, India, Lima.
Oh,
Oh.
very good.
Okay, Echo, Lima, India, Oscar, Papa Uniform, Lima, Oscar Sierra.
That's pretty good because I can't spell your name normally.
I'm sorry, the last one up.
You just made it up. Just pick letters at random. Dave?
Delta, Alpha, Victor, India, Delta, Delta, Romeo, Alpha, Bravo, Bravo, Lima, Echo.
Not bad, not bad. Okay, so you should be able to remember this pretty much like Dave did. Star, smiley face. Good work. Alright, now, there's going to be a little bit more of this later. Not so much phonetic alphabet, but more phraseology. Okay? So you might want to have a look at those sheets you've got there with the standard phrases on them, because we may ask a couple of questions on that too. Okay, summary from last time. In the last session, we discussed and understood each function and component related to a handheld VHF radio. We briefly discussed communication phrases, the handout given, the one we're just talking about right now. We understood how to operate a radio and the elements associated with those operating functions, such as power source, radio master, transmitter, receiver, antennas, push-to-talk, maintenance related to the VHF radio. Okay? We discussed the types of frequency bands and their functions related to a VHF radio, and we understood how a radio transmitter, spell wrong, and receiver function works. And finally, we discussed the characteristics of a VHF antenna.
Seems to go into.
I see. We haven't.
Slideshow.
We'll go here and do this. That's better. Now it will work. Okay. Radio failures and emergency procedures and fault finding. Most radio failures are generally very simple issues which are usually caused by a lack of diligence before you took off. We'll discuss that. Objectives. This session will cover all elements in relation to how to handle a radio failure or radio failure procedures, appropriate emergency and urgent transmissions, conduct fault finding procedures. A few typos in this. Communication failures. If you are unable to establish or maintain VHF contact, you should check your radio has power. Remember, I said that most situations with radios are simple errors, usually by you. Check your radio has power. Make sure you turn the damn thing on for starters. You'd be surprised how often that's the problem you're having with the radio. Then check the control settings. Is it on the correct frequency? You'd be surprised how many times people are going, I can't hear anybody else, because they're on the wrong frequency. You'll find with radios, there's a chart up there on the wall, and there's a lot of information about radios on that chart. There are different frequencies you use for different areas. So you must know whether you're in this area frequency or that area frequency, and change accordingly. So be on the right frequency. The radio settings are important. And connections. Radio, we usually have headsets plugged in, or speaker mics or something, or power inputs, external power. Make sure all your connections are good, okay? If there's still no contact, assume your transmitter is okay, and prefix calls with transmitting blind to indicate that you are not receiving incoming calls. So every time you make a radio call, you say transmitting blind at the end of it. That way people know that you're not receiving. There's no point in talking to you if you're not receiving.
So before you actually say anything, you say transmitting blind, and then
Now you do your radio call as normal, and then you say transmitting blind. Continue to transmit your position and intention as appropriate to keep air traffic control or other aircraft informed. Include transmitting blind at the end of each broadcast. Okay? Make a safe landing as soon as practicable if you are flying in an area where radio is required. So you're flying in what we call a CTAF-R, where radio is mandatory. If you're not sure your radio is working, make a safe landing as soon as practicable and fix the problem. If another pilot or your retrieve crew, I know some of you are glider pilots, so if your retrieve crew can receive VHF, then and you have a UHF, which you usually do if you're a glider pilot, then you can use the UHF radio to check that your VHF is transmitting. Okay? And if it is, well, at least you know you're transmitting. And make sure that you don't have an open mic. So if the PTT button has jammed for some reason, you might just be on transmit permanently, which can be embarrassing.
So Sean, I'm flying my hang glider, I'm going across Northern or something, I want to check in and just let them know I'm going past.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a mandatory area to have it, but it's recommended.
Well, there's a higher traffic volume
right.
around that area, so it's a good idea.
So I'm there and I try transmitting and I can't get through, and I've got my UHF radio. Can I transmit to the ground crew who have one of these and
Yes, absolutely.
relay my message?
Absolutely, they can relay a message that you're a hang glider pilot and you're transiting the area and your altitude is and blah 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 and what your intentions are. Yes, certainly they can do that.
If I'm in controlled airspace.
If you're
Then
you're
I can't.
in a hang glider, you're not allowed to fly in controlled airspace for starters. But if you're flying through a CTAF-R, which you are perfectly entitled to do, you must have a functioning radio. If you're not sure that your radio's functioning and you're on a cross country and you might have to traverse a CTAF-R, then you either go around that CTAF-R or you land. Okay, any other questions? No? Sweet. Fault finding issues that may occur. Now remember, I've said that most of these are simple errors on your part. No power, no antenna connection, faulty headset or mic connection, incorrect radio settings. Fault finding a VHF radio is a necessary skill. Quite often, a minor configuration error will render the VHF inoperable. Headset wiring, push-to-talk buttons, if you have external mics, all these plugs and wires are liable to fail. Anybody that's dealt with electronics for any length of time will know that wires break and plugs break. Okay, so be aware of that. As it says in the next paragraph, headset mic equipment is usually connected to the VHF via plugs and cables. Cables and things break. We've discussed that. It is a standard part of the procedure to ensure that the radio is functioning as part of the pre-flight check. So before you get in the air and go, oh, things aren't working, it's a good idea to find that out. So whilst you're on the ground, make sure that you've turned the radio on. Make sure that you're hearing stuff through your headset if you have a headset. Make sure that things are working before you take off. Ensure all connections, headset, mic, aerial and power are serviceable and connected to the radio properly, as we've just discussed. Check the configuration. Intercom switch, master switch, power switch, fuses. Well, we don't have most of those with the handheld, but make sure that anything that you do have, like external power or headsets or anything, is serviceable. Ensure power is getting to the radio, i.e. there is an LED light or the screen is lit up, something of that nature. If the thing isn't powered up, there won't be anything showing. Ensure reception is routed to the headset, if you're wearing a headset, or the speaker. Turn the squelch off so that you can hear the static hiss. Ensure correct frequency is selected. Ensure your aerial is connected and perform a transmission radio check. So it's often a good idea to have a buddy who's got one of these anyway, if you're in a remote area especially, so that before you take off, you can do a radio check between the two to make sure that you're transmitting and receiving clearly. Observe status transmit indicator or radio whilst transmitting. So when you push the press to talk button, you will either get a TX on your screen, or there'll be a red light or something lights up to say that the set is actually transmitting. Most faults encountered could be classified as power, configuration, connection cable problems and dealt with accordingly. Almost every time there is a problem with the radio, it's one of those issues. The radios themselves are very, very reliable. It's just a question of whether you've looked after it properly. In-flight emergencies. The key words and their uses are as follows. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Used when the pilot experiences a serious in-flight emergency. What would you describe as a serious in-flight emergency, Cyril?
Something that would prevent you, like they would stop, it would affect the aircraft to the point where it may not be able to fly, emergency landing, running out of fuel.
Yeah, it's something that is likely to endanger the aircraft or the occupants or the occupants, okay? So if you're, as you say, in a normal, in a hang glider, of course, you know, running out of fuel isn't an issue because you don't have any. But in a normal aeroplane, running out of fuel is a serious issue because it's a life-threatening situation if you don't have somewhere safe to land. And if you're flying over a forest and your power goes off, you have a problem, okay? So mayday, mayday, mayday is only used in a really serious life-threatening situation, okay? You don't use it frivolously. No, oh shit, I forgot my lunch. Mayday! Okay? Pan, pan, pan is another one we use, which is for other situations but not quite that serious. If you were flying a microlight aircraft or possibly an ultralight aircraft where you can land almost anywhere, running out of fuel, it wouldn't be a mayday, but it might be a pan, pan, pan. Okay? Things I would classify as mayday, things like mid-air collisions, structural failures. In a normal fixed-wing aeroplane, you know, running out of fuel would probably come under mayday unless you're confident of a safe landing at an airport or something. Pan, pan, pans, instrument failures, things like that. You know, things that aren't going to, the aircraft's still flying fine. It's just it's an issue that needs to be sorted out and could develop. All right. In both cases, you should state either mayday, 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 or pan, 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 your call sign, the nature of your distress, your intentions, your position, your altitude, your heading, and any other useful information. Alright? So, order of priority. In these situations, you must think first. there is an order of priority in all aviation. Your first priority is aviate. Fly your aircraft. Okay? Deal with your flying issue first. Navigate is the next one. So even in a serious situation, you want to try and get yourself to a safe landing. Okay? So aviate, navigate, and then communicate. Okay? So the first two priorities are aviate and navigate, and then communicate. Think before you press that button. Even in an emergency, think. What am I going to say? What is the problem? How am I going to deal with it? Aviate, navigate, and then communicate. Okay? Any questions?
I'm flying across a forest, but I thought I was going to clear, and I hit a whole heap of sink, and it looks like I'm going down. So I'm flying, nothing much has changed. I think the big priority there would be to communicate before you go out of radio range.
You don't think that maybe picking the safest landing spot in that forest would be your first priority?
Well, it would be, and I don't disagree with that, but I'm just thinking that if I was at, say, 4,000 feet and I knew that I wasn't going to make it out, I'd probably want to transmit fairly early, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, you're dealing with a hang gliding situation here. Okay, 4,000 feet. You've still got quite a lot of time, 4,000
I'm
feet.
just saying that there's no one who can make it out, you know.
Yes, but you've still got quite a lot of time.
That's right, yeah.
You've still got quite a lot of altitude.
That's
You're
what
not
I'm
going to
saying.
run out of radio signal for quite some time at 4,000 feet. So again, your first priority would be to maintain control of your aircraft and navigate towards the best position you can be in. And then you can, once you've decided where you've decided to stay in control of your aircraft, you've decided to go in that direction because that's your best landing option,
Yeah.
and then you can transmit your
Yep.
problem.
Yep.
Because you don't know, you might get back up. You know, even at 500 feet on a hang glider, you can still get back up.
Yeah, true.
Okay, you could certainly put out a pan, and then if you manage to scratch your way back up, you can then put in a correction and withdraw that pan. Okay, but yeah, aviate, navigate, communicate. But certainly, yes, you should be communicating. Don't find yourself in a situation where you're about to hit the ground before you start trying to communicate.
If you do pan, what gets initiated by people that pick that up? So if we're in like sort of nearby and we hear it, what are our responsibilities?
Okay, your responsibilities are basically to monitor that situation, because if he believes he should keep you updated, you know, ask him if there's any assistance you can offer, if there's any anybody you can call. Do we want me to call the emergency services? He might say, it's not that serious, you know, let me see if I can sort the problem out. I'm just warning people that I have an issue, okay? If he asks you to do something, then yes, it's your duty of care to do everything you can to help him. Phone the police. If you can get in touch with air traffic control, remember he's got an airband radio. So all the other aircraft in the area are listening to that area frequency. And if he's not getting a response, or you're not getting a response on your area frequency, you can also switch to the emergency frequency. 123.4, I think. 0.45, something like that. Okay, so again, at the pan, certainly get on the radio and ask if there's any assistance you can give, but don't go panicking and, you know, calling everybody. A mayday, again, ask that person if there's any assistance you can render, but if you're on the ground, there's very little you can do apart from call emergency services. Okay, all other aircraft are going to be monitoring that channel, and if there's a mayday, all other radio communications will stop, apart from those dealing with that mayday. Air traffic control will be on. Melbourne will be on to that radio frequency very rapidly. Any Any other questions? Sweet. Should have put that slide up first, shouldn't I? Any questions on anything?
121.5 is the distress charge.
1 to the 1.5. Yes, that does mean that.
Is that frequency just for Australia, or is it international?
It's international. Yeah. It's international frequency. Remember that this doesn't just apply to light aircraft, microlights, hang gliders. This applies to 747s that have come from all over the world. So all these radio frequencies and procedures are standard throughout the world. Alright? You've just got to know what frequencies you're supposed to be on and use the correct terminology. If you use the wrong terminology, people, you might get the odd snobby comment, but generally people aren't going to be upset with you, especially if you're in a difficult situation. But try to keep your standard phraseology good, because it helps get messages across quickly and saves confusion. Alright?
Sean, you'd have to once you've got your VHF airband license, do you have to reset it at all?
No. Once you've got it, you've got it.
And does it cost anything?
It doesn't cost you anything to get